I was still at my desk when my phone buzzed. It was nearly 5:30 p.m., the sun setting through the tall windows of my office. My daughter, Emily, should have been home from her after-school art class by now. She always texted me before she left, usually with a photo of whatever painting she had finished. But tonight, nothing. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, all I heard was the voice of a stranger, trembling. "Are you Jessica Carter? Emily's mother?" My stomach dropped. "Yes, where's my daughter?" "There's been an accident. She's at St. Anne's Hospital. You need to come immediately." I don't remember dropping the pen in my hand or knocking over the files on my desk. I only remember the sound of my own pulse in my ears as I grabbed my bag and ran. By the time I reached the parking garage, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. The 20-minute drive to St. Anne's was a blur of red lights and near collisions. I don't even know how I got there without crashing myself. When I pushed through the sliding doors of the emergency ward, I spotted my sister Claire pacing in the waiting area, tears streaking her face. "They hit her, Jess. Some idiot in a sports car. Emily was crossing at the light and he just..." Claire broke off, covering her mouth. My knees nearly gave way. "Is she alive?" "She's alive," Claire said quickly. "She's in surgery. Broken arm, cracked ribs, a concussion. But she'll make it." For a second, relief flooded me, enough to let me breathe. Then the anger came. Hot, consuming. "Who was driving?" Claire hesitated. "Witnesses said it was a black Maserati. They got the license plate." She lowered her voice. "Jess, it belongs to Kyle Morrison. The CEO's son." I froze. Kyle Morrison, 22 years old. Known around town for his flashy cars, wild parties, and endless scandals that always disappeared within days. And of course, his father, Richard Morrison, the untouchable billionaire who ran Morrison Global. The man who donated millions to campaigns, had judges on speed dial, and controlled half the city like a puppet master. I had crossed paths with Richard Morrison once before at a fundraiser. He was charming on the surface, but the kind of charm that coated venom. And now his son had nearly killed my daughter. A detective in a worn gray suit appeared, introducing himself as Detective Harris. His face told me everything before his words did. "Mrs. Carter, I wanted you to hear this from me. We traced the car. Witnesses saw Kyle Morrison get out and run, but..." He hesitated. "But what?" "His father's already brought in a team of lawyers. They're claiming Kyle wasn't driving, that it was a case of mistaken identity. Without physical evidence, it's going to be difficult." I felt the blood drain from my face. Difficult? My daughter was lying broken in surgery, and they were talking about difficult? "Detective," I said slowly, carefully, "are you telling me the Morrison family is trying to erase this?" He gave me a tired look. "I'm saying Richard Morrison has influence. He's done this before. Cases vanish, charges dropped, witnesses change their stories." For a moment, the room spun. I gripped the edge of a chair, forcing myself not to collapse. In my career, I had learned how to keep control of my emotions, how to stay composed even when everything inside me was burning. But this was my child. I swallowed hard. "Thank you for being honest with me, Detective." He nodded, apologetic, then walked away. I sat down in the cold hospital chair, staring at the wall. The rage inside me wasn't wild anymore. It was cold, sharp, precise. I had buried a part of myself years ago, choosing a quieter life for Emily's sake. I'd built a career as a corporate consultant, left behind the world I once knew. The world where I had learned how to fight battles most people never saw. But now those instincts stirred again, whispering to me. When the surgeon finally came out and said Emily would pull through, I thanked him, but my mind was already moving elsewhere. Not on healing, but on retribution. I stepped into the corridor, dialed a number I hadn't used in years. When the voice answered, gravelly and cautious, I said, "It's Jessica Carter. I need a favor." There was silence, then a low chuckle. "Jessica, I thought you'd gone soft." Not anymore, I said. I want everything you can dig up on Richard Morrison. His business, his contacts, his son. I want leverage, every dirty secret. Careful, the voice replied. That man owns half the court system. I looked back toward the room where my daughter lay, fighting for her future. My voice hardened. Then he's about to learn what it feels like to be powerless. That night, as the monitors beeped softly beside Emily's bed, I made myself a silent promise. Richard Morrison thought money could erase consequences. He thought his son was untouchable. But he had just picked a fight with the wrong mother. And in the morning, he would realize who I really was. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Emily's bed, listening to the steady beep of the monitors, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw headlights, heard the screech of tires, imagined her small body thrown to the pavement. By morning, the rage inside me had sharpened into something colder. I had spent my career navigating boardrooms full of arrogant executives who believed money insulated them from consequence. But Richard Morrison had crossed a line. He wasn't going to bury this under legal paperwork. Not this time. Not with me. At noon, after Emily was resting comfortably and Claire promised to stay with her, I drove downtown. Morrison Global's headquarters loomed over the city like a glass fortress. 40 stories of steel, glass, and arrogance. The lobby smelled of polished marble and power. The receptionist smiled politely until I said, "I'm here to see Richard Morrison." "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Tell him it's about his son Kyle," I said, my voice steady. "And my daughter Emily. He'll want to see me." Something flickered in her eyes. She picked up the phone, murmured a few words, then nodded reluctantly. "Mr. Morrison will see you. Top floor." The elevator ride was silent, but my thoughts were deafening. This wasn't about negotiation. This was about setting terms. When the doors opened, I stepped into an office so large it could have been a showroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, and at the center of it all, behind a sleek mahogany desk, sat Richard Morrison. He didn't stand. He didn't even offer a handshake. He simply leaned back in his leather chair, a glass of scotch in his hand, studying me like I was a minor inconvenience. "Mrs. Carter," he said smoothly, "I'm sorry for the unfortunate situation with your daughter." Unfortunate situation? My voice was ice. "Your son ran her down in the street and fled." He waved a dismissive hand. "Alleged. And even if Kyle was involved, he's young. Boys make mistakes. Accidents happen." I stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated by his practiced charm. This wasn't an accident. This was negligence. Criminal negligence. His eyes hardened. "Mrs. Carter, I understand you're emotional, but let's be realistic. Even if charges were filed, which they won't, my son is untouchable. I own the city's courts. Judges, prosecutors, politicians, they all answer when I call." There it was. The arrogance. The sneer beneath the tailored suit. He believed it. He really believed his power made him immune. I leaned over his desk until I was close enough to see the faint lines of age at the corners of his eyes. "You have no idea who you're talking to." He smirked. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. A mother, a consultant, a woman who doesn't understand how this game is played. Take the insurance settlement my lawyers will offer and move on with your life." I checked my watch. "You have 10 minutes to call the police and turn Kyle in. Full confession. No deals. No excuses." For a heartbeat, he stared at me in disbelief. Then he laughed. A deep, mocking laugh that echoed against the glass walls. "Or what?" he taunted. "You'll sue me? Post angry messages online? I've crushed men twice your size for half as much insolence. You think you can threaten me?" I straightened, my expression calm. 9 minutes? 40 seconds. His laughter grew louder. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Security?" But before his guards arrived, his office door burst open. A man in a tailored suit rushed in, his face pale. "Morrison's lawyer." Richard, the man said, his voice low and urgent. We have a problem. Morrison scowled. Not now. Yes, now. The lawyer snapped, sweat beading at his temples. He held up a tablet with trembling hands. The judge you own? He just announced his sudden retirement this morning, effective immediately, and Detective Harris filed for a new warrant, signed by a judge we don't control. Morrison's smirk faltered. That's impossible. The lawyer's voice dropped to a whisper. They have traffic camera footage, private security feed, clear as day. Kyle behind the wheel. They're coming for him. The room fell silent except for the hum of the city outside. Morrison's arrogance wavered, replaced by the first glimmer of fear. I looked at my watch again. 6 minutes left. The lawyer swallowed hard, then turned to me. Mrs. Carter, please. We'll follow your terms. Kyle will turn himself in. Full cooperation. Just stop this before it goes further. I met Morrison's eyes. You thought money made you untouchable. You thought power meant protection. But you forgot one thing. Real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from consequences. As I walked out of that office, leaving Richard Morrison in stunned silence, I felt something I hadn't felt since the accident. Control. For the first time, the fight wasn't just mine. The dominoes had already started to fall, and there was no stopping them now. When I left Morrison Global that afternoon, I didn't drive straight back to the hospital. Instead, I pulled into a quiet parking lot 2 blocks away and sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Richard Morrison had laughed in my face. He had treated my daughter's life like an inconvenience, something to be settled with insurance money and a signature. But those 6 minutes changed everything. The moment his lawyer burst into that office, pale and panicked, I knew his empire wasn't as invincible as he believed. The truth was simple. Men like Morrison thrived on silence, on people giving up, on fear. But I wasn't afraid anymore. That night, after Emily finally drifted off to sleep, I opened the secure laptop I hadn't used in years. Most people saw me as a consultant who managed corporate restructures. What they didn't know was that my consulting career had been built on something deeper. Before I became a mother, I had worked as an analyst for a private intelligence firm. My specialty wasn't just contracts and negotiations. It was data, networks, leverage. The things people didn't want seen. And Richard Morrison had plenty he didn't want seen. The first call I made was to Aaron, an old colleague who now ran a cybersecurity outfit in Chicago. Jess, he said, surprised. I thought you'd gone legit. I had, I admitted. But I need a favor, discreet, fast. He hesitated. Who's the target? Richard Morrison and his son. There was a long pause. Jess, that man is dangerous. He's got government contracts, judges in his pocket. If you poke at him... I'm not asking. I cut in. Emily's in the hospital because of his son. They're already trying to bury it. I won't let that happen. Aaron sighed. All right, send me what you've got. I'll dig. By midnight, he'd already sent me the first report. It was worse than I imagined. Shell companies, offshore accounts, suspicious payments to a judge who had dismissed Kyle's DUI the year before. Donations to politicians routed through fake nonprofits. It was a web of corruption, and every thread led back to Morrison. I organized the files carefully, labeling each piece of evidence. This wasn't about destroying him recklessly. It was about precision. If I wanted to win, I had to do it the right way. One undeniable fact at a time. The next morning, Detective Harris called me. His voice was heavy with frustration. Jessica, the DA's office is dragging their feet. They're saying the witness statements aren't strong enough. Without direct evidence, they won't move forward. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the documents glowing on my screen. What if you had more than witness statements? What if you had financial records tying Morrison to corrupt judges? What if you had security footage of Kyle behind the wheel? Harris was silent for a moment. If we had that, everything changes. But how could you possibly... Don't ask how, I said firmly. Just be ready to act when I deliver it. When I hung up, I thought about the risks. I was stepping into dangerous territory, and I knew it. But the image of Emily's bruised face kept me steady. She deserved justice. I wasn't going to let another victim get erased by money and power. That afternoon, Aaron sent me a secure file. Inside was gold, clear footage from a private security camera near the intersection where Emily had been hit. It showed the black Maserati running the light, Kyle's face illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. There was no mistaking it. I forwarded the footage to Harris with a single line. Check your inbox. 9 a.m. tomorrow. That night, I met with Claire in my kitchen. She had been quiet since the accident, but when she saw the files spread across my table, her eyes widened. Jess, what are you doing? What I have to, I said simply. Morrison thinks he owns this city. He doesn't own me, and he doesn't own justice. Claire touched my hand. This is dangerous. People who go after him, they don't win. I looked her in the eye. Then I'll be the first. The following morning, true to my word, Harris received the evidence. His voice on the phone was alive with energy I hadn't heard before. Jessica, this is it. The footage, the car, even the payments to Judge Conway. It's airtight. I can move on this. Good, I said, because this is only the beginning. As I hung up, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Richard Morrison had laughed when I gave him 10 minutes. He thought I was powerless. But now the storm was gathering. And when it broke, it wouldn't just be over him. It would sweep away everything he thought untouchable. By sunrise, Detective Harris had called twice. The first time, he thanked me for the video. The second time, he reminded me it couldn't come from me if it was going to survive a defense challenge. I need the original source, Jessica, he said. Chain of custody matters. If defense can argue it was tampered with, it dies in court. I understand, I said. Call First Main Bank's security director. His name is Leon Park. I already asked him to preserve the footage. He'll respond to a subpoena. Harris exhaled. That helps. I'll get the paperwork to him within the hour. While Emily slept, I stood at the window and watched the parking lot lights blink off one by one. Hospitals run on the math of minutes. Dosages, vitals, rounds. Courtrooms do too. Deadlines, filings, hearings. If I wanted this to hold, I had to be patient and precise. By mid-morning, Harris texted, Bank produced original. Subpoena satisfied. Warrant signed for the car. Another message followed with a location pin to a private garage on the west side. It wasn't a raid like in the movies. 2 uniforms, a locksmith, a clipboard. They photographed everything. The Maserati's front right quarter panel told a story. Fresh paint, misaligned bumper tabs, a spidered headlamp. Lab will match the lacquer fragment we found at the scene, the evidence text said, sliding a labeled envelope into a lockbox. We also pulled the EDR, event data recorder. Shows a hard break from 52 down to 0.4 seconds after the light turned red. I didn't speak. I just looked at the car until my own reflection in the glossy hood blurred. It should have been the last thing Emily saw before blacking out. Harris touched my shoulder. We're moving, Jessica. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. At noon, the DA's office announced a conflict of interest and requested a special prosecutor from the neighboring county. It sounded bureaucratic, but it was important. Richard Morrison's donations had seeped everywhere in this city. A prosecutor with no ties meant fewer strings to pull. 30 minutes later, Judge Conway, who had tossed Kyle's DUI last year, recused himself from all Morrison matters. He didn't resign. He simply stepped aside. Fine. I didn't need his resignation. I needed him out of the way. My phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Carter, this is Hugh Benoit, counsel for Richard Morrison. I'm calling to discuss an immediate civil resolution. We can structure a package that covers medical, pain, and suffering. Future? No, I said. He paused. You haven't heard the number. I don't need a number. Miss Carter. He tried again, voice softening. You're under a lot of stress. A settlement spares your daughter a lengthy process. Trials are unpredictable, public, cruel. Your client is the cruelty, I said. Put your offer in a letter if you have to. I won't read it. The tone changed, just a hair. Off-the-record advice. Be careful what you stir up. I recorded the call, logged the time, and emailed the file to Harris with 2 sentences. Attempted civil pressure. Slightly veiled threat. For your records. At 3 o'clock, Harris called back, voice wired with motion. Kyle's counsel reached out. He's surrendering at 6. There'll be a bail hearing in the morning. The news didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity. Emily's CT scan showed a clean trajectory for recovery, but she tired easily, and her left arm throbbed when the meds wore off. When she woke, she asked if the person who hit her was sorry. I told her I didn't know. I told her we were making sure he faced what he did. Like how you make me take responsibility when I forget my homework? She asked. Exactly, I said, and kissed her forehead. Rules are for everyone. At 5:30, I left the hospital and drove to the courthouse. I didn't intend to watch Kyle turn himself in. I wasn't sure I could trust my face, but I needed to be near the machinery that had started moving. The evening air was sharp, the kind that makes your lungs aware of their work. A black SUV pulled up to the Sally Port at 6:07. A young man stepped out in a navy suit and ankle boots too stiff for his posture. For a second, I saw a boy who had never been told no. Then I saw Emily's bracelet on a tray, cut off in the emergency room. I turned away. On my way back to the garage, a shadow detached from a pillar. Richard Morrison. No entourage, no performance lighting. Just a man who hadn't slept and didn't know where to put his hands. You're making a mistake, he said. You think this ends in a courtroom? It ends with 2 ruined families. It ends, I said, with accountability. Your son will have lawyers, a judge, a chance to speak. My daughter didn't get any of those chances in the crosswalk. He glanced past me toward the courthouse doors, and for the first time, his certainty cracked. You've made powerful enemies. I don't need friends, I said. I need facts. I walked to my car and locked the door before my hands started shaking. I waited it out, counted to 30, then drove to a diner a few blocks away. Harris met me in a booth with coffee that tasted like burnt bread. There's more, he said quietly. Body shop manager called us. Says he was asked to accelerate a repair and to keep a separate set of invoices. He brought the messages. We're protecting him and his family. Obstruction? I asked. Maybe. We'll take it one step at a time. That phrase, one step at a time, followed me back to the hospital. Claire had coaxed Emily into eating half a bowl of soup. The room was dim and mercifully ordinary. I washed my hands, sat, and listened to the monitor's patient metronome. I texted Aaron a single word. Thanks. He sent back a thumbs up and nothing else. Good. The less we said, the better. Before midnight, the special prosecutor filed 2 motions. One to preserve all Morrison Global communications related to Kyle for the last 72 hours, and another to prohibit contact with witnesses, including me. I read them on my phone in the blue hospital light and felt a kind of relief that has no celebration in it, only breath. I wasn't winning. I was simply keeping the process intact long enough for it to do its job. When Emily stirred, I took her hand. She blinked at me, sleepy and stubborn. Am I still brave, Mom? You're the bravest person I know, I said. And tomorrow we keep going. She closed her eyes. The room settled. Somewhere across town, a young man sat in a holding cell. A father sat in a quiet house that used to feel like proof, and a judge reviewed paperwork that would decide a morning. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. We were finally moving at the speed that matters. The bail hearing was the first time I saw Kyle without tinted windows or headlines. He looked smaller than I expected, pale under courtroom fluorescence, fingers worrying his cuff. Claire squeezed my hand. The special prosecutor laid out the basics. The bank video, the car's data recorder, The body shop messages. No theatrics, just facts. Kyle's attorney didn't fight the evidence. He asked for release with conditions. Judge Alvarez kept it measured. Serious injury to a child, flight from the scene, efforts to conceal. Bail is granted with strict conditions: surrender passport, GPS monitoring, no driving, no contact with witnesses. She looked at Kyle. Any violation and you will be remanded. He nodded, eyes on the table. At the hospital, Emily was propped on pillows, tracing a bookmark. Did the judge say he has to apologize? She asked. Not yet, I said. Court is slow. It's supposed to be. Weeks passed in small, useful markers. Lighter jackets, longer evenings, Emily laughing without wincing. I worked part-time while the kettle whistled. The lab matched the paint. The EDR report was finalized. The body shop manager's messages were authenticated. A grand jury indicted for felony hit-and-run causing serious injury. Richard Morrison stayed mostly off stage. His lawyers faced microphones. A business journal said the board was reviewing governance. A month later, he stepped down to focus on family. Not handcuffs, but a consequence. The kind he'd said would never reach his side of town. In August, the prosecutor called. We're discussing a plea, she said. Guilty to the felony, will recommend 3 years, 18 months in custody, the balance suspended, 5 years probation, restitution, license revocation, and community service speaking to new drivers. You have the right to be heard. Will he admit what he did? I asked. Yes, on the record. What about his father? Separate matter, she said. We're still evaluating obstruction. The plea hearing was quiet. Kyle stood, voice shaking, and said, Guilty. He described the light turning yellow, pressing the accelerator, the thud, the panic, the running. He said my daughter's name. He said he was sorry. I don't know if it would mean anything to Emily, but I needed to hear it. The judge accepted the plea and set sentencing for October. I wrote my statement until the words felt like bone. On the day, I kept my voice even. Your Honor, accountability is the point. My daughter crossed on walk. She did what we teach. An adult chose to break that rule, and when harm came, he chose to run. I don't ask for a sentence that ruins a life. I ask for a sentence that teaches him, and everyone watching, that rules are for everyone, especially when no one is there to clap. The judge chose her words. Mr. Morrison, your age and acceptance of responsibility weigh in your favor. Against you are the flight, the injury, and attempted concealment. The sentence, 36 months, 18 to serve, 5 years probation, full restitution, license revoked for 5 years, and 200 hours of community service in driver education. No cheer, no gasp, just chairs scraping and papers sliding into folders. I stepped into sun and felt steadier. The next day, a certified letter arrived. Richard Morrison's counsel proposed a pedestrian safety grant in Emily's name at her school. I set it on the counter and made tea. Later, I forwarded the proposal to the district with one condition. A third party must administer it, funding crossing guards and driver education for 3 years. If they agreed, fine. If they didn't, also fine. We were past gestures. In September, Emily returned to art class. She chose blues and greens and asked me to stay for the first 10 minutes. When I stood to leave, she pressed something into my palm, her bracelet repaired with a new clasp. Can you wear it today? She asked. Every day, I said. I still see the intersection when I drive through town. I still measure yellow lights with a caution I didn't used to have. But the city feels different. Not because power changed hands, but because good people did their jobs. A detective who didn't look away, a banker who preserved a file, a technician who cared about lacquer fragments, a judge who kept her voice steady. At dinner one night, Emily asked, "Are we done, Mom?" "We're not broken," I said. "That's the part that matters." She nodded and went back to her mashed potatoes. I looked at the repaired bracelet on my wrist and thought about rules, mercy, and the work it takes to make consequences real. This wasn't revenge. It was responsibility, paid in the only currency that counts. The truth carried all the way to the end. The morning of my sister's wedding began the same way every family event had for the past decade, with my mother's carefully worded phone call. "Miranda, sweetheart," she began, her voice dripping with a mix of pity and control. "Please remember that this is your sister's special day. Dress nicely, smile, and, well, try not to talk too much about work. We don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable." "Of course, Mom," I said, staring at the pale pink bridesmaid dress that hung in front of me like a punishment. I slipped it on anyway, knowing full well it made me look like a deflated cupcake. Work. That was the word my family never said in front of outsiders. To them, I didn't have a career. I had what they like to call my situation. It sounded more like a chronic illness than a profession. In their eyes, I worked at a grocery store and had never risen above it. The truth was something entirely different. I was the founder and CEO of Redline Global Logistics, a company valued at $3.9 billion, operating in 42 countries, employing over 70,000 people. We specialized in streamlining global supply chains, building the invisible systems that kept food, medicine, and everyday products moving across the world. Our contracts included some of the biggest names in retail and pharmaceuticals. I spent my weeks negotiating mergers, optimizing international distribution routes, and addressing world leaders at economic forums. But to my family, I was the failure. It all began innocently enough years ago, when I worked late-night shifts at a local supermarket. Back then, I was researching from the inside, wanting to understand exactly how products moved from suppliers to shelves. I stocked cereal boxes and rang up groceries not because I had no other choice, but because I wanted to build something bigger. When relatives asked what I was doing, I said I was in food logistics. They smiled politely, translated it into, "Miranda works at the grocery store," and the label stuck. I never corrected them. Not after Uncle Tom patted my hand at Thanksgiving and said, "At least you're not unemployed." Not after Aunt Grace compared me to my sister, who had just passed the bar exam, and told me maybe I should consider night school. Correcting them meant opening myself up to skepticism, mockery, and long lectures about being realistic. So I stayed quiet. I let them believe I was simple, small, unambitious. A part of me wanted to see how long they could keep the story alive without ever asking me directly. The answer, it turned out, was indefinitely. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been its own test of endurance. My sister Alicia was marrying into a family of visible achievements. Her fiancé, Daniel, came from old money. His father owned a chain of luxury hotels. His mother sat on the board of an international charity. They carried themselves with the ease of people who had never worried about money, reputation, or status. "So, what do you do, Miranda?" one of Daniel's groomsmen asked me over wine. Before I could answer, Alicia swooped in with a laugh. "Oh, don't mind her. Miranda works at a grocery store. She's our family's little reminder that not everyone can be a superstar." The table chuckled politely. My sister's fiancé offered me a sympathetic smile, the kind reserved for stray dogs and forgotten coats. I just sipped my drink, saying nothing. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but hearing it in front of strangers stung more than usual. My mother leaned over later and whispered, "She doesn't mean harm, darling. Just let her have her moment. Don't make a scene." I smiled and nodded. Making a scene wasn't my style. But part of me wondered why protecting her dignity was always more important than protecting mine. By the morning of the wedding, I was emotionally numb, bracing myself for the endless parade of comparisons. During hair and makeup, the bridesmaids, Alicia's friends from law school, chattered about their promotions, their travel plans, their future partnerships. When the inevitable question came, "And what about you, Miranda?" Alicia answered for me without missing a beat. She's been working at the same grocery store for years. It's honest work. They smiled politely, the way people do when they don't know what else to say. One of them added, "Well, stability is a blessing." I laughed softly, agreeing, even though my so-called stability came from running a multi-billion-dollar empire with contracts across 5 continents. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Alicia looked radiant in lace, Daniel beamed with pride, and my parents cried tears of joy. I held my bouquet and focused on keeping my expression neutral, ignoring the whispers I caught behind me about how stress had aged poor Miranda and how, at least she seems happy in her simple life. By the time we moved to the reception hall, I was weary. Toast after toast celebrated Alicia and Daniel, their families, their ambitions. When Daniel finally raised his glass and thanked the incredible people who represent the best of achievement, his words turned, inevitably, to me. "And to Miranda," he said with a grin, "who proves that happiness doesn't always come from ambition. She's content with her simple life at the grocery store, and that's admirable in its own way." Polite applause followed. I forced a smile, though my chest burned. They applauded me like I was some charity case, some fragile soul they pitied. That's when I saw him, my assistant James, walking through the crowd in his sharp black suit, cutting straight toward me. His voice was calm but carried across the room. "Boss," he said, just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "your helicopter is ready to leave this cheap party." The champagne glass in Alicia's hand slipped and cracked against the floor. Every head turned toward me. And for the first time all night, I didn't look away. The silence that followed James's words seemed to stretch on forever. Forks paused midair. Conversations died mid-sentence, and every face in that ballroom turned toward me. "Boss?" Alicia repeated, her voice sharp, her carefully constructed smile trembling. What is he talking about?" James didn't flinch. He stood tall in his tailored suit, hands clasped loosely in front of him, his tone professional but unmistakably firm. "The helicopter is fueled and waiting, ma'am. We'll need to depart in 20 minutes if we're to make the 9 p.m. call with Zurich." I felt every muscle in my sister's body stiffen beside me. She looked from me to James and back again, searching for the punchline. Her new husband, Daniel, frowned, clearly trying to decide whether this was some elaborate joke. A few guests chuckled nervously, waiting for me to laugh it off. But I didn't. I simply took a sip of champagne and set the glass down. "Miranda," my mother hissed under her breath. "What is going on? Is this some kind of prank?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned to James, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Thank you, James. Give me a few minutes, I'll be ready." He nodded once and stepped back, but his presence lingered like a storm cloud at the edge of the room. The whispers started almost immediately. "Helicopter? Zurich? Did she say call, like business?" Uncle Tom leaned across the table, his face red from both wine and confusion. "Miranda, don't tell me you've gotten yourself into something shady. God knows there are scams out there. Are you in trouble?" I forced a smile. "No, Uncle Tom. I'm not in trouble." Alicia, on the other hand, wasn't smiling. She slammed her champagne flute onto the table, the sound sharp enough to make people flinch. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "She works at a grocery store. Everyone knows that. Mom, tell them." All eyes shifted to my mother. She looked as if she'd swallowed glass. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment she said nothing. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Miranda's always been private. She doesn't like to brag. Perhaps her colleague here is exaggerating." Her words only added fuel to the fire. "Exaggerating?" one of Daniel's relatives repeated. "Either she has a helicopter waiting or she doesn't." My father, who had remained mostly silent until then, leaned forward, his tone gruff. "Miranda, what the hell is going on? If you've been hiding something—" Before he could finish, Daniel raised his hand, trying to smooth things over. "Look, it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe this assistant of hers is confused. Let's not let this ruin the night." But Alicia wasn't having it. She stood abruptly, her dress swishing against the floor, and pointed a finger at me. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? You couldn't stand that this was my day, so you had to make it about you. Bringing some actor to play your assistant? Talking about helicopters and Zurich calls? God, Miranda, it's pathetic." The room had gone deathly quiet again. I could see the discomfort on the guests' faces. Some pitying me, others questioning Alicia's outburst. I stayed seated, keeping my tone even. "You've always loved to underestimate me, Alicia. I never corrected you because it was easier, but maybe that was a mistake." She laughed, high-pitched and bitter. "A mistake? No, Miranda. The mistake was thinking you'd ever amount to anything. You don't get to waltz into my wedding pretending to be something you're not." James cleared his throat politely. "With respect, Mrs. Carter," he said, using her new married name, "Miranda doesn't need to pretend. She runs a company that—" "Enough," Alicia snapped. "Stop lying for her. This is my wedding, not some stage for her delusions." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same one I'd carried for years as they dismissed me, laughed at me, and turned me into the family punchline. But tonight, something in me hardened. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. I rose slowly from my chair. The movement alone seemed to silence the room. "I didn't come here to steal your spotlight, Alicia. I came here to celebrate you. But if telling the truth makes you feel overshadowed, maybe that says more about you than it does about me." Gasps rippled across the tables. Alicia's face turned crimson. My father stood too, his voice booming. "Miranda, sit down. This isn't the place." I met his gaze evenly. "Isn't it? Because for years you've all been perfectly comfortable turning family events into opportunities to humiliate me. You labeled me the failure, the charity case, the one with the situation. You never asked me directly. You just decided who I was and spread the story until it became truth." Several heads dropped, eyes shifting away from mine. "And now," I continued, my voice steadier than I felt, "the moment you're confronted with evidence that you might be wrong, you call me a liar. Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's that you're all too comfortable underestimating me because it makes you feel better about yourselves." The weight of my words hung in the air. No one dared speak. Even Alicia, for all her bluster, looked momentarily stunned. Finally, James stepped forward again, checking his watch. "Ma'am, the helicopter pilot just confirmed. We'll need to leave shortly." All eyes snapped back to me, and this time no one was laughing. The ballroom felt smaller by the second, the air thick with judgment and disbelief. Dozens of eyes followed my every movement as if I had transformed into some unfamiliar creature they didn't know how to categorize. Alicia's hand was trembling as she clutched Daniel's arm. "You see?" She hissed loudly enough for half the room to hear. "She's trying to humiliate me. On my wedding day of all days." Daniel gave me an uneasy smile. "Miranda, maybe it's best if you sit back down. No need to escalate." James interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Carter, there is no escalation. This isn't a performance. My job is to make sure Miranda is exactly where she needs to be, when she needs to be there. Right now, that happens to involve an international call worth several $billions." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some people laughed nervously, assuming it was exaggeration. Others whispered behind their napkins, eyes darting between me and James like they were piecing together a puzzle that didn't fit. My cousin Julia shook her head in disbelief. "Miranda, if this is some elaborate prank, it's gone too far. Helicopters? $billion calls? Be serious." I didn't flinch. "I've always been serious, Julia. You just never wanted to hear me." Uncle Tom leaned forward, his face ruddy. "If you're really so important, then why do you drive that old rust bucket of a car? Why live in a modest apartment? Why show up looking like—" He gestured at my pale pink dress with obvious disdain. "Like this?" I smiled faintly. "Because I don't measure my worth in leather interiors or designer labels. Maybe that confuses people who do." Murmurs rippled again, louder this time. My father stood, his jaw set. Miranda, enough. You've embarrassed this family for years with your stubbornness. Don't you dare start spinning fairy tales here. That hit harder than I expected. Embarrassed you? I repeated softly. By choosing a different path? By refusing to play the role you wrote for me? My mother tried to cut in, her voice sharp. Miranda, please. But I wasn't finished. You've all been so quick to laugh at me, to dismiss me. When I said I was in logistics, you heard grocery clerk. When I mentioned hiring staff, you assumed I meant stocking shelves. When I traveled, you told yourselves it was training shifts, not boardrooms. You've built this whole narrative because it was easier than admitting you never bothered to ask me what I actually do. Alicia's face was flushed, her hands balled into fists. Stop acting like a martyr. If you were really this executive you're pretending to be, why wouldn't you tell us? Why keep it a secret? I looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, because humility isn't the same thing as invisibility. I thought if I kept things simple, maybe you'd see me for who I was, not what I'd achieved. Clearly, I was wrong. For a second, the room was silent again. Then my cousin Derek scoffed. Come on. Forbes list? Helicopters? Multi-billion-dollar deals? This is fantasy. If she were really who she says she is, we'd all know. It would be on the news. At that, James shifted. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he turned the screen toward the nearest table. A hush fell instantly. Projected on the screen was a headline from Bloomberg. Redline Global CEO Miranda Hale to finalize $3.9 billion Zurich deal. My Aunt Susan leaned forward, her glasses sliding down her nose as she read aloud. Redline Global? That's you? Always has been, I said simply. Shock rippled across the room like a wave. People craned their necks to see the headline. Phones came out, fingers tapping frantically. Within seconds, murmurs turned into open exclamations. Oh my God, it's true. She's really on the Forbes list. Miranda Hale. I didn't even connect the name. Alicia staggered back a step, her hand clutching the tablecloth for balance. No, this isn't possible. You let us believe you were struggling. You let me say those things about you. You weren't interested in the truth, I said evenly. You were interested in a story that made you feel superior. And I let you have it, because fighting against that arrogance felt like shouting into the wind. Daniel looked stunned, his jaw tight as he whispered something to Alicia. She didn't answer. Her eyes were still locked on me, wide with disbelief and something else. Fear. Behind me, James cleared his throat again. Ma'am, the pilot is requesting confirmation. Zurich is waiting. I nodded slowly, then turned back to the room. I didn't plan to make a scene tonight. I didn't plan to say any of this, but maybe it's time to stop hiding. Maybe it's time you all finally understood who I am. I could feel the weight of every gaze pressing into me, a mix of shame, regret, awe, and fury. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking. They were. And the night wasn't over yet. The room buzzed like a hive. Screens glowed everywhere, my name reflected in 100 tiny mirrors, and the floor seemed to tilt as people tried to rearrange their memories to fit a new truth. Alicia's voice cut through the noise. You humiliated me, she said, breathless. In front of everyone. You did this to me. I met her eyes. I didn't do anything to you, Alicia. I stood here while you told a story about me that wasn't true. Tonight it finally ran into a wall. She blinked hard. Daniel took her hand but didn't speak. My mother's lips were white. Miranda, she said carefully, if this is real, why wouldn't you tell us? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, you called it my situation. Because it was always a competition. Because bragging is ugly and silence felt safer. But I see now that silence also lets other people write your life for you. Uncle Tom cleared his throat, defensive out of habit. No one meant harm. You laughed, I said softly. You all laughed. And when you were finished, you called it harmless. James stepped close, lowering his voice. Ma'am, pilot confirms the slot at the hospital helipad, 2 blocks west. Car is at the service entrance, 8 minutes. Thank you, I said. I could feel the room listening even to that. Alicia's gaze sharpened. So you're leaving? Now? You're proving everyone right. You never cared about family. I took a breath. I showed up for you. I wore the dress. I stood where I was told. I kept my mouth shut. Caring about family doesn't mean accepting the parts where they erase you. I reached into my clutch and pulled out an envelope, heavy with cardstock. This is my gift. It's a contribution to the legal aid program you posted about last month. In your name. I scheduled it weeks ago. Her face flickered. Confusion, then shame. She didn't take the envelope. Daniel did, quietly. My father looked older than he had that morning. I pushed you, he said, voice rough. Told you to be practical. Maybe I didn't want to see anything else. I know, I said. I'm not asking for applause. I'm asking you to stop assuming the worst version of me is the true one. He nodded once, eyes wet, and sat. I turned to the closest table, to the cousins and in-laws who had looked at me like I was breakable. I'm not here to settle scores. You were working with the information you liked best. That's on me for letting it stand. But from now on, you don't get to use me as your lesson in smallness. The band had gone silent. Even the waiters seemed to be holding still. I lifted my glass, palms steady. To Alicia and Daniel, I said, and my voice carried easily. May your marriage be built on seeing each other as you are, not as the story is more convenient to believe. May you celebrate each other without needing to stand on anyone else. That's love. That's respect. A few people murmured, "Hear, hear." Others just watched. Alicia swallowed, her chin shaken. I was jealous, she said, the words barely audible. Not of your money, of your nerve. You've always done what you wanted, and I wanted... She stopped, tried again. I wanted to be the one who made Mom proud. You already are, I said. And you could have done it without stepping on me. Her eyes filled. Can we talk? Not here. We can, I said, but not tonight. It wasn't punishment. It was the truth about how long it takes to unlearn a habit. James touched his earpiece. We should move. On the way out, I paused by my mother. She reached for my wrist, then let her hand drop. I didn't know how to be proud of you if I didn't understand you, she whispered. You don't have to understand me to be kind, I said. Start there. We slipped through the service corridor, the smell of dishwater and hot metal, a busser startled by James's quiet evening. Outside, the night was cool and ordinary. A sedan idled at the curb. I slid in, the dress pulling at my ribcage. James handed me a dark blazer from the garment bag. Figured you'd want something less pink, he said. Good call. I shrugged it on, tied my hair back with an elastic from my wrist, and opened my laptop. Zurich had already sent a revised schedule. I pinged legal to join. The car rolled through 2 lights, then turned toward the hospital. Red marker lights winked above the roofline. What did you think would happen tonight? James asked lightly. Honestly, I said. I thought I'd leave early, go home and pretend none of it bothered me. He smiled without looking at me. Progress then. Security waved us through. The elevator groaned to the roof. A technician clipped a badge to my blazer and guided us across the paint-striped concrete. The helicopter thumped steadily, the downdraft pushing the city's damp air against my face. I climbed in, buckled, adjusted the headset. Zurich on line 1, James said, passing me the sat phone. We're wheels up in 30. I took a breath, then another, letting the noise settle into the background. This is Miranda, I said into the mic. I'm on. Voices layered in my ear. CFO, counsel, the Zurich team sounding freshly caffeinated. We cleared the last sticking point in 15 minutes. We'll close at 8:30 CET, someone announced. Congratulations. Likewise, I said. The pilot lifted us into the dark, the city shrinking to a glittering grid. I leaned back and let the quiet come. Somewhere below, a party was resuming. Some people would be rewriting their stories about me before dessert. Others would double down. That wasn't my work to do. This was my work. To build, to decide, to hold the line on what mattered. And this was my boundary. I would be humble, but I would not be invisible. I would love my family, but I would not carry their version of me. Below the rotor's thrum, the message formed as plainly as a road sign. Do not let the people who refuse to see you decide who you are. Ask for kindness. Enforce it. Correct the story when it turns into a cage. James tapped the tablet with a knuckle. Office in 6, he mouthed. Good, I mouthed back. Let's change out of this dress.